Hello everyone, this is Shannon for Waffle Flower Crafts. In this video we are going to create some very colorful bold cards inspired by modern quilts using some brand new products from Waffle Flower's August release. To start today's project, I have a bunch of color cardstocks here. This is all just my scraps. I have 22 colors picked out, and I'm going to combine them with this color combo die set. This die set works great with the color combo stamp set for making your own kind of color combo palettes. It's great for storing those color combos that you like when you are in a pinch and having a hard time picking colors. I'm going to use this die very differently today and use it to create little pieces of paper that I will combine together to build a quilt. Today I'm using the die that cuts out the triangles, one large and two small, but actually a lot of the dies in that color combo die set could be used to create your own modern quilt. So I went ahead and die cut all of my 22 colors out with that die that cuts the triangles, and I have a large piece of white cardstock here, and I'm going to take my tape runner and run it along this rectangle that I traced out. The rectangle is the size of an A2 panel, so that whole A2 panel area is covered now with sticky tape. I'm going to start with the small triangle. I'm actually going to use only the small triangles for this very first quilt. And I'm going to take my white cardstock and push it up against that lip of the water medium mat. That's going to help me get really good placement on this very first triangle. I'm going to use that lip to help me get a nice straight edge, get that triangle nice and flush with the top edge of the cardstock. Then I'm going to move on to my next triangle, and I'm going to butt up the diagonal parts right up against each other to create this little square, and that's kind of like my first little piece of my quilt. I'm now moving on to my next triangle, and I am doing these in rainbow order. That's why I have all of my triangles arranged here on my water medium mat in rainbow order. I decided I needed another nice flush edge of the water medium mat to help me, so I just rotated my cardstock around. This is actually the left side of the cardstock, and I now have it up against the bottom of the water medium mat to help me get these triangles in place. Now I make a little mistake here. I actually put that triangle at the wrong angle, so I am going to turn it around here. I want each one of these little squares that I make with pairs of triangles to have the opposite diagonal from the one before it, and that way it just gets a really nice pattern. You can do whatever you like, whatever pattern you want, but I think it makes a nice kind of diamond panel or diamond shape kind of when all four of the squares are together. It just has, I think, a really nice look. So I'm continuing my way through my rainbow. You can see I'm kind of doing like a zigzag kind of motion with my rainbow, and it just has a really pretty look when it's all done. And I'm going to cover that whole area that I penciled out, that whole A2 area. It definitely goes a little bit beyond it, but that's okay because we will trim it down. And that completes my first quilt. So now we are going to kind of trim this panel down so it is going to fit on an A2 card. I'm actually going to use the second largest die from the A2 Layers die by Waffle Flower. This die is a little bit smaller than an A2 panel, but it is going to cut the perfect rectangle that fits inside of the big dots die, which you see right here. I'm going to use this big dots die to dry emboss this panel, and this is what's really going to give it that quilt look. To dry emboss, you need a rubber mat, which you see right there, and then you're going to grab your cardstock, place the die on top, and then put that sandwich, the die and the paper, directly on top of that rubber mat. That rubber mat is going to prevent that die from cutting the cardstock, but will give a really great impression, just like embossing folders would, but we're doing it with a die. So I just ran it through my die cutting machine, and you can see here, when I hold it to the camera, we have this beautiful circle kind of impression on the cardstock. Really gives it that look of like that quilting, stitching on a quilt. So a really pretty look. I'm now going to move on to a second panel. I'm going to make a second quilt here with these remaining big triangles that I cut with that die earlier. So again, I'm going to do them in rainbow order. I covered a little bit larger area than an A2 panel on this large piece of white cardstock. This white cardstock, actually, by the way, is about 5.5 by 8.5. It doesn't really matter what size cardstock you use. You just want to make sure it is bigger than an A2 panel. So now that I have all these big triangles stuck down, I am again going to trim this down. This time I'm going to use the largest die from the A2 layers. This largest die from the A2 layers cuts a perfect A2 panel, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm just going to center it on my kind of quilt here and then run it through my die cutting machine, and then I'll remove the tape, and then I'll have this perfect A2 panel. I'm going to then use this panel and die cut a frame using that second largest die from the A2 layers die set. This is going to cut a really small thin frame, and again remember that second largest A2 die cuts a perfect rectangle that fits within that big dots die. I'm going to use this thin frame to actually frame that quilt, so a little different look for this one beyond the larger triangles. I am going to dry emboss it. Before I do that, I'm going to take that panel and, just like I did with the first panel, run it through my die cutting machine with the rubber mat and the big dots die to do some beautiful dry embossing. And to finish these cards up, I do need to create my sentiments. I have some sentiments from the Big Dots stamps or sentiment stamp set, and I'm going to do a little heat embossing. So I put down some anti-static powder, then ink them up with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, put on some clear embossing powder, and now I'm heat setting these. After I heat set these, I will trim them down to be little small rectangles with my paper trimmer, and now I have all my components here to finish up these cards. I got two white card bases that are 110-pound weight. I'm going to grab one of those and grab that first panel, that first quilt that we made, add some liquid glue to the back side of it, and just pop it right down onto our A2 card. As you can see, there's a thin border because that big dots die cuts a panel that's just slightly smaller than an A2 panel, which I like the nice white border. And then I'm going to grab my sentiment, which I added some foam tape to the back side, and just stick it right down on the center of that card. For our second panel, again, I'm going to start with the smaller panel, and I'm just going to add some liquid glue and stick it down, and making sure there's a nice even white border all around it. Then I will grab that really thin frame that we cut out, add some liquid glue to the back side of this, and I'm actually going to rotate this so that the colors don't match up. I really like doing this with my dies when I have like pattern paper, or I kind of create my own pattern paper like I did here. I just think it really offsets it and really makes it look cool. I love doing it, and I just love how this frame really, I think, really enhances the look of a quilt. And then again, I'll just take my sentiment, remove the backing on the foam tape, and stick that down. I didn't get it quite centered, so I just popped it off here and re-centered it. I'm using the lines of the colored cardstocks to help me center it. And once I get it there, I'll push it down, and that actually completes my cards. I'll now hold these cards up to the camera so you can get a good look at them. I really had so much fun creating these cards. Love playing with all the beautiful cardstock. Love the fact that those were just my scraps. That little die from the Color Combos die set is only 2x2, and I was able to create 2 cards from just 2x2 scraps of colored cardstock. I think that's so cool. And I just love the dry embossing from the Big Dots die. I think it works perfectly, really makes these look like quilts. So these cards that I made in the video, these 2 here are in rainbow order, and these next 2 cards are actually kind of random. So kind of 2 different looks, even though with the same technique. I hope you guys enjoyed today's cards and video. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit Waffle Flower, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.